The future of progressive radio. This is the Dean Obadala Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here, Monday, November 26th. In studio, our friend Julian Zelizer, professor at Princeton University, CNN contributor. We have a lot of politics. Julian, thanks for coming into the rain. You're a good guy.
Great to be here. It's great to be here.
And by the way, folks, we have, if you're on Twitter or Facebook.com/Dean of Radio, you can check out the live stream. We have a new thing we're doing now. When the guest comes on, we have their own little image with their Twitter handle and everything behind them. It's hard to explain. If you check it out. Julian, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We just had on Lamar White Jr., who is a publisher at the Bio Brief to talk about the race in Mississippi. And you wrote about Mississippi, that the stakes are pretty high here. What is your take on what's going on in Mississippi?
It's a little bit like a replay of the caravan where you saw, in that case, President Trump unleash this really pretty vicious reactionary campaign, and we waited to see how it was going to happen. Here you have a candidate, the Republican, who first was like 100% Trumper, but since the election, which led to a runoff between herself and Mike Espy, you know, you've had a series of stories and statements about her passion for the Confederacy, which in Mississippi is a very loaded thing.
Right.
Her comment about wanting to go to a public hanging, and this is a state with the most lynchings of all the southern states between the 1880s and 1960s. So here you have that uglier part of the Republican Party front and center. And so I think it's going to be relevant if she wins. It's going to be relevant if that doesn't dissuade moderate white voters, for example, if they exist, from moving over to Espy, who's pretty moderate himself.
Yeah, Lamar White Jr., the publisher of the Bio Brief, who's also teaming up with a paper in Jackson, Mississippi, was saying there are Republicans who are now openly broken from her and are endorsing him. And Mike Espy tweeted a short time ago him standing with a Republican guy named Heath saying, thank you for your endorsement, that kind of stuff. So he's making the play, trying to get the same way Doug Jones beat Roy Moore, took a coalition of progressives and at least some disaffected Republicans, or at least for them not to come out. I mean, that's part of it.
It's hard, though. I mean, it's a deeply Republican state. The support for President Trump is very strong here. It's a runoff, so there's going to be less interest, or at least you think there'd be less interest in the midterms, although it might not be the case given what she said, and just the series of images that have come out with her in Confederate garb. She went to an all-white academy, which were created intentionally to avoid desegregation. So her politics seem very clear to many people. And so that might stimulate more turnout than you'd expect from the African-American community.
On Election Day, she got 41.5%. Mike Espy got 40.6%. And Chris McDaniel, who is a Tea Party, got 16%. But I was amazed by how little, there's not a lot of people who are voting, because she won slightly, but this runoff she got 368,000 votes.
Yeah.
You know, that's not that much to become a senator.
Well, yeah, no, that's true. I mean, a lot of these midterms hinge on smaller numbers than you'd think, and often the margin of victory is pretty narrow. The number of people voting is very small, but in the end, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like sports. It's who gets the win and who gets the loss, and what happens on the way to that, in some ways, it becomes irrelevant once it's over. The McDaniel part of that was also interesting because he also was very aligned with white nationalist groups and made many really controversial statements. And you know, he was competitive. And again, that's the story we keep forgetting, the normalization of all of this now front and center in American politics. It's not hidden. It's not coded. This is just out there. And yet partisanship often still holds in some of these states, which says a lot about the GOP.
Are you surprised that in 2018, because to go back slightly, again, Lamar White Jr., who's really a focus on Louisiana more, but he's also focused on this race, made some great points on the show. It was only not long ago, David Duke ran, known as the Grand Wizard, former Klan, and got a majority of white people statewide in two different races he ran in. And I'm like, well, that was not 1960s. That was much more recent past, 80s and 90s maybe. And Am I naive? Am I delusional not to understand the power of white supremacy and sucking up the Confederacy the way she's doing? Because we went through it in great detail with Lamar, that pictures of her with the Confederate hat on, saying the best of Mississippi history, and fighting as a member of the state legislature to name a highway after Jefferson Davis, a man I view as a traitor.
Yep.
I mean, I can't help
Yep.
it. I'm objectively speaking, he's a
Subjective,
traitor.
right.
He took up arms against the United States of America. They had their own currency, and they killed soldiers from the United States of America.
It's not a debate. I mean, that's just the fact. Look, there's two ways to look at American history. One is a story of progress and evolution on these key issues of social rights, of equality, even if there's disagreements over policy. The other is a much bleaker view, that these kind of forms of hatred and division are really deeply entrenched in American life, and they don't really go away. So when we had the 2008 election, I think people saw it from both perspectives. Some were elated. They said, Obama's been elected. This is a sign of great progress. Others were more cynical, saying all that anger, all that hatred is still right below the surface. What might be surprising is now it just went right to the surface, and you see it, and it's not having totally the kind of effect in some areas you'd hope it would at this point.
It's interesting because when you say that, I can instantly see in my head the photograph of articles going, are we in a post-racial America after
Right.
Obama got elected? The idea
No.
that I didn't even understand what that meant.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, what do you mean post-racial America? And I would read the article like, does race not matter?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to matter more today than at any time in my life, to be on a national level, not regionally. I'm sure it was always there, but forget post-racial. We'll never get post-racial. Now understanding that the idea that race will not matter. But we are in a hyper-racial time where you have a candidate sucking up the white Confederacy. There's no doubt. I mean, 2014, the picture on Facebook hanging out with the white Confederate hat. Not the Confederate hat. And Donald Trump going down with no qualms whatsoever. 2 rallies, Tupelo and Biloxi, to stand next to someone who also, as Lamar pointed out, also had pictures with a man the Southern Poverty Law Center has described objectively as a white nationalist.
Yeah.
And there's not hiding it anymore. You can't even shame them into why did you stand with a white nationalist? There's not even an apology for it.
Well, I mean, you have different parts of American politics coming together in 2018. One is this underlying, continued form of social anger, hatred, division, which from at least my perspective never disappeared. I was more on the pessimistic side of what some of the country is. Part of this is partisanship and the partisan polarization we talk about. And the party, at least the Republican Party, is absorbing some of these feelings as part of its strategy. It's playing on them. It's capitalizing on them. It's trying to at least manipulate them for their own purposes. And finally, a president who doesn't try what Richard Nixon did, which was to play on this, but do it through code, or to do it sometimes and do it subtly. Or even Reagan did this sometimes, or George H.W. Bush did this in his campaign in 1988. Trump isn't like any of them. He just is front and center that he's going to play around with these things and see where it goes. Those three things coming together, it's a pretty powerful explosion, and I think that's what we've been seeing in the last year. And it's ugly. It's a sad story. It's a sad part of the state of politics.
Well, there's one. I don't know how many truisms there are in politics. If there's one truism, there's probably a lot, at least close to truism. But from what I've seen is that when things work in politics, that politicians and people running for office will replicate that. And when they fail, they will not talk about it. They move on. So when you see Donald Trump succeed running on a campaign in 2016, because his reelection campaign's already begun, it never ended, frankly, but now it's going to begin much more in earnest. He ran on a campaign of demonizing Muslims and Latinos and immigrants and ginning up fear and lying nonstop. And nothing has changed, except a little less Muslim demonization because he needs Saudi and he understands that. So that's the only thing that's tempered him on some odd level here. But when Trump is gone, I mean, it's pure speculation, but if other Republicans see this formula has worked on a national level, even if not on a local level, will they not try to mimic it?
Absolutely. There's no way, unless this is totally devastating by 2020, where if you do this, you won't have a job in politics. That's the only calculation that would stop this. They're already replicating it. We're seeing in Mississippi, we're seeing a version of what Trump does at the state level. That's what Hyde-Smith is about. And we saw it in many campaigns. Some worked, some didn't work. And I think we'll see it when President Trump is gone. That's the role of the president, whoever the president is, to contain these kinds of forces in American politics. That's the key of good leadership. If you go in the opposite direction, there's few people who can put that back in the bottle.
Well, what we've seen in Mississippi, and it came up in my conversation with Lamar Smith, that corporations have been pushing back. Like Walmart and Major League Baseball asked for refunds of the donations to Hyde-Smith's campaign. Can corporations, look, they're not going to change anyone's mind. I've learned that now. What I thought was people having their eyes open and becoming more tolerant was not. They just didn't feel emboldened to talk about it. There's more of them that had these issues. But can these corporations at least have an impact, do you think, on changing what's acceptable to talk about and openly celebrate?
They could. I mean, in the South in the 60s, one of the stories people forget about were businesses in states like Alabama started to push back against the real racists. And they said, we're going to suffer. We're not going to have business. We're going to be a national joke. And that was important in softening up where whites were on the issue of civil rights. So business, not by withdrawing donations, but by really applying pressure in these communities, saying we're not going to do business here. They can have an effect. Race is still powerful, and a lot of people won't care, but it's not insignificant if corporations really took a stand. I don't know if they will. In the end, their major issue is profit and what their bottom line is. So it depends if this interferes in some ways in the long run in that.
You know, your article for CNN was titled, "Why the Mississippi Vote is a Key Test for America." Do you think, I mean, maybe Rich gave you or maybe you gave that idea for the title, but that was the essence of your article.
Yep.
How can it be, though, a test for America, that this is just Mississippi? I can't vote. I can't have any impact on it. I think Mike Espy, objectively speaking, has a heavy lift, is a nice way of putting it, because of the state. They've not elected a Democrat in 3 decades. Trump won there big. He's popular there. So how do we pass this test, showing that we're moving forward?
Look, to me, it says a lot, not just about Mississippi. It just says a lot about where the Republican Party is. If not only does Hyde-Smith win, but she's part of the U.S. Senate. She's part of the party caucus, and this is a normal part of business. And I can point to many senators, and I can point to a president and make a similar argument. They are in power. And so it says a lot about where parts of this country are if this is tolerable in 2018. The only way to kind of say this is not acceptable, we've moved forward, is to see these kind of candidacies instantly go down. Roy Moore was an example where being a child molester and a sexual assaulter was not, that was it. That was disqualifying. Not for everyone.
Barely, though. Barely disqualifying.
No, that also said a lot. But at least there the choice was made. So that would mean here all this neo-Confederate passion in 2008 is not disqualifying to be a U.S. senator. That would tell me a lot about that storyline of American history.
You know, I try to wrap my head around where are we going as a country, and I have no idea in where we go in the future, in that Donald Trump has He has not made people be bigoted. He's not, I don't think so. He's made them celebrate things in America that we thought maybe were gone, or we thought that you would not talk about in the public, about Charlottesville, for example. But beyond that, like, he celebrated mocking Dr. Christine Ford at a rally in front of everyone. And I really believe most of those people, they may have mocked Christine Ford on private, but they never would have thought of doing that publicly in front of everyone and mocking and laughing at her, like, you know, the idea suggesting she's a liar, a victim of sexual assault. Trump has made that okay. And to me, everything comes from this place of cruelty. And I'm really concerned for the country in the future. It's not on these one-offs. It's sincerely about this common denominator of celebrating cruelty. And we just played a clip of Geraldo Rivera, who was on Fox News tonight, making an impassioned plea about the people at the border, and that we're suspending our humanity. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's so well put to me, because that's also the companion to Trump celebrating cruelty. The other side part of it is suspending humanity, and not only not caring about others, but ridiculing and mocking those who don't look like you, who don't love like you, or pray like you. I'm really fearful where we're going as a nation because it's beyond any specific issue. This to me is where I'm getting Trump what he's about. He's a cruel person, and he's making his base enjoy mocking and mimic, demeaning people left and right.
No, that's what it is. I mean, the good news is there's a lot of the country, and there's many people who don't support that. They're either taking a stance if they're Republicans or not, and then other parts don't agree with us at all. We just saw that in the House election. People are really not happy with this. But look, he got millions of votes. He still has millions of supporters.
Oh, yeah.
The Republicans were able to retain control of the Senate. We can take all the reasons, but they did. And so that shows there's underlying support for this kind of politics. It doesn't mean that every Republican agrees, but it means that a lot of Republicans will tolerate this,
right,
which says a lot. And you're right. It's very easy to lower the bar in American politics. And we see on the border, this has real consequences. It's not simply about, oh, people are being mean. All of a sudden, people are, being sprayed with little kids and people fleeing from danger. So it has real consequences. And that's what's unsettling. And that's why the Republican Party, in some ways, really has a moment of reckoning in terms of where they are on all these issues and all these figures. And if there's ever going to be some serious pushback, not only to a piece of legislation, but to what the party now represents.
And even and we're going to take a break and come back and talk about the politics of immigration and what's going on down there. But even when you look at that policy and where it's defended by Trumpers, it really is a cruelty. It's dehumanizing the people at the border. Because I made the point earlier in the show that I don't even want to use the term migrants. I want to use the term human beings. These are human beings at the border who are fleeing horrific conditions, most of them from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, coming to America for a better life for themselves and their family. And my father happened to take a plane to do that. So he came over the border legally and took a plane to America. But for these people, there's no sense when Trump talks about them. He uses terms right out of propaganda playbooks, honestly, from Nazis' 1930s, invasion. And he's one step from calling them vermin. I mean, we're really not that far from that. And when you look at that time period, it's dehumanizing someone so that you can be cruel in ways no one thought another human being would do collectively as in the case of the Nazis, let's say. But you have to dehumanize someone to the point where you can do that stuff to them. Yeah. And that's what worries me about Trump, that this celebration of cruelty and dehumanization could lead to something very, very dark. I don't know where. I just worried about the future in this country. I really am. Not for me. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm worried. But let's take a break. Come back. Talk to Julian Zelizer right after this break on the Dean Obeidallah Show. You're listening.
The biggest stories of the day. Right now. This is the Dean Obadala Show.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show, live here with Julian Zelizer, CNN contributor, professor, and surrounding us are screens of images of what's going on at the border, especially on Fox News. They're adding more people digitally, so they look like it's even scarier what's going on over there. Let's talk about the politics of immigration. Trump is clearly today doubling and tripling down on this topic, tweeting about it. We're going to close the border permanently, he declared. And I played a clip with Judge Napolitano earlier going, you can't do that. There's a law. You're not allowed to do that. In any event, you know, in the world of politics, we talked about it earlier from the other side, that if things go well, you replicate them. When they don't go well, you tend to move on. Well, Trump is talking about the immigrants at the border just like he did right before the election, where Republicans got in the House devastated, terrible. I mean, nearly 40 seats. And now they're saying it's the most votes for Democrats in the House midterm, not just in sheer seats, but overall since 1974, when we took 7 governorships. Objectively speaking, it was not a good night for the GOP. But Trump has not at all moved away from this topic.
Right.
And I talked about it earlier in the show, putting it out there for callers, like, why? What is your sense?
It's hard to know if he's actually thinking it through. Meaning it could be just instinctive. He does the issues he cares about. This is one he really loves to go after. So symbolically, it can matter for a president. Party might be more calculating. He might be saying, look, Obama lost poorly in the House in 2010. Clinton lost all of Congress in 94. They both were reelected. So they recreated the coalition that brought them in. That's what happened, and I'm going to do the same. I don't know if he's that strategic, but he might be thinking, or finally he might be looking at a lot of these red Southern Senate elections where he did hold the seats.
Sure.
And again, in Mississippi, we'll see what happens. But the calculation will be that's the way he has a chance of winning, is to retain all those red states. And a Senate election is more representative than a House election of where that might go. And then somehow by 2020, pick off some Democratic states again. So if he's calculating, he might be thinking that the map didn't shift totally. And so this still makes sense. But I do think part of this is an issue he really believes in. And it goes back to the 80s when he would rail against Japan and China as destroying the United States. He's not sympathetic to the immigrant workforce. And so I think it's a combination of those two things. It might be a totally failed calculation,
right,
but there is a calculation there.
It's so funny that he rails against an immigrant workforce when he's hired foreign workers.
Right.
And hypocrisy and Trump go synonymous, and you can't even call him out on it. But when it benefits him, he'll do it. And Trump has never tried to reach beyond his base. At this point, if you were objectively advising him, would you tell him to even try or just forget it?
No, probably if I was advising him, which is hard to imagine, I continued to see a logic in what he's doing. He's not going to win other people over.
Right.
So his best bet is to keep the base excited, keep Republicans who aren't in his base saying he's better than a Democrat. And we will have an actual Democrat in 2020, which could change things a little in terms of how Republicans and moderates think of voting. And then by 2020, who knows what will happen, but he might be able to, get enough. Remember, the election's going to be through the Electoral College. These rural states have a lot of power still. He did well in the midterms in these rural areas. There's an article in the Times today highlighting that. Ron Brownstein's been talking about that. So I could imagine an advisor saying, don't try to switch and don't try to do anything, because that's not going to work. Your best bet is to recreate 2016, and they still love you.
Well, what about one other option I brought up?
Yeah.
That Trump is doubling and tripling down on this because there's a big funding fight in Congress. December 7th, we might run out of money. There's part of a deal, but not enough of a deal, so it can shut down. And he is actively talking about his wall and wanting to be funded, and hoping in his own calculation that talking about the threat of this invasion coming might get more people to support funding this wall.
It could. It's probably part of it. I don't think that's the only reason. It's clearly on his mind. I'm sure he's hearing about it. Can't imagine he knows the details, but he knows he might get the money for the wall, and that's like on his mind because he promised that he wants to deliver it. and that's a winning issue. I think it's part of it, but I do think it's a core issue in his mind of why his supporters support him. And polling shows there are a lot of Republicans who consider the immigration problem, quote unquote, a top issue.
Yes, they do.
And so it's not totally without logic to say, I'm going to stick to that because Republicans agree with me. He doesn't have to do it the way he does it, but that is how Trump goes about
and
his
Trump.
business.
Why should Trump tackle the more difficult topics like healthcare
Yep.
and actually driving down prescription drug costs as opposed to signing executive order and doing nothing, or really dealing with the opioid crisis, or really dealing with wage stagnation, which is still going on generally, and what I think is a looming economic slowdown, and I'm not wishing for that, but worldwide we're seeing some of it. You saw GM's news today, which is not good. And you can say, well, part of that is they're embracing more technology to be more efficient as a company, but still you are closing down plants, laying off 15% of your workforce. That sounds a lot. And so I'm concerned about that. What if there is, historically, what does it tell us? We've had shutdowns, obviously, under different presidents, even under Trump for a few days. Yeah. If December 7th, if we really shut down and it's clear it's for Trump over his wall, how do you think that plays out?
I mean, it depends how long it lasts. I think for the people who are energized in 2018 in these midterms, meaning all the Democrats, the suburban educated voters, all the different groups we keep talking about, they will see this as a confirmation of why he is inept and not competent to govern. But again, everything that happens in Washington is seen through a partisan prism. And so many Republicans will already say, even though Republicans control Congress, this is exactly what you get with Democrats in power. And I can bet he will tweet that within about an hour tops. This is about the Democrats now having power. This is what you get. And so the thing about shutdowns is they're totally unpredictable in terms of who gets the blame, how they're seen, how they're framed. So it's hard to predict that way.
And in 2 years, when we get to the presidential election, it won't matter at all.
It won't matter a week later. And
and
that is a calculation of his.
Right.
I mean, he understands the psychology of the media. It's day-to-day media now, week at a most where a story lasts. And so in some ways he might be thinking, whatever, by January, people will forget.
Are you surprised we're not seeing more Democrats actively out there right now? I mean, maybe they're out there quietly. Bernie put out a statement a short time ago. It was actually interviewed, I think, and CNN shared it on Twitter, where Bernie Sanders said he didn't say he was going to run. He goes, if somebody out there could be better to defeat Trump, I will support them. But the inference was, if not, I'm going to run. Tom Steyer has talked about he's forming a committee and he's out there now doing a series of town halls. When should we see, historically, when do you see this in earnest? When are we going to see like 10 candidates in Iowa and New Hampshire?
In the next few months. I mean, some of them are there already. You're hearing even about some others, Sherrod Brown, Kamala Harris. So the names are circulating, and Warren. I think in between January and March, you're going to see them really pop out. I think part of it is a lot of Democrats don't want to step in the way of the House Democratic victory, where you have all these new voices and new faces, and even Speaker Pelosi kind of taking this moment of victory and using it to define what the party is. So I think a lot of them are probably just waiting a little bit, but they're going to start to come January.
I imagine they have to be out there working on their stump speech.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Steyer, that's what he did. I mean, it was clear when I am moderated 2 of his town halls. And I'm like, this guy is working on his stump speech because he's getting every question from the audience organically. There was no questions that were screened. I moderated 2 of them. Literally anyone could raise their hand and ask any question whatsoever, and he would respond. But after him doing 25 or 30 of them, you're going to get the same core questions, and you work on your answer, just like a candidate would do for office. So I thought it was ingenious what he was doing. And I wasn't sure if he was going to run or not, and he's still not 100% sure. He's exploring, and I think he might run. I think if he sees, he's a business guy, if he sees a viable way, a lane to actually get some traction, I think he runs. If it's not, maybe not. But I wonder if the other ones, if Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Bernie's got a stump speech. It's a really good one. If the others are out there, like fine-tuning their message in a way that's not just on a piece of paper, folks. It's really about getting organic applause lines and then repeating them over and over and over. Stump speech starts, a guy gives a big speech or a woman gives a big speech, and maybe 1 or 2 lines are good and it lags, and then little by little they edit. If they're smart, they're staffers, they work with them. Before you know it, you have a speech that's got a bunch of applause lines, a lot of energy. It's delivered like you're really saying it as opposed to a speech. The only way to do that, and I'll tell you from a comedic
like
background, is going out there and honing your speech like I would an act. So they've got to get out there soon.
Yeah, no, they have to be doing it for all the reasons you said. I think comparing it to a comedian is perfect. And even kind of testing the way you say things and how you say it and the timing all matters in politics. That's what some of this time is about. Look, they'll also be consumed with fundraising. They're all trying to just figure out in this day and age, post-Trump, who's viable and who's not. I don't think they all get it. Right. I don't think anyone does. And there's a sense of instability. It's not like 20 years ago where you had a pretty good sense of, who the next in line are. People feel this could be a little more wide open. So
I think it will be. I
think it will be.
Look, if Joe Biden runs, it changes the dynamics a little bit.
Yeah.
If Bernie runs, and I think he will run, I'd be surprised if he doesn't. He goes in probably as one of the front runners if Biden doesn't run. If Biden does, you can have them competing close. But you're going to see a lot of candidates. It's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it as someone who loves politics. I also am concerned about who gets the nomination in a very fractured field where someone wins it with 15 or 18% really of the vote. And you're like, oh, are we going to unite around them? But I'm hoping when you look at Trump, if you need a candidate who's a counterbalance, I'm not sure anymore if I want the counterpuncher who's going to punch him everything, as opposed to someone who rises above that garbage, talks about what they're going to do for this country, and who truly celebrates compassion as a pushback to his cruelty agenda.
That's the strategic choice Democrats will face. And I don't know which way they're going to go. And I don't know, maybe you can have the ultimate candidate can do both. But I think that's a big question as, we start to think about Iowa and how it's not simply responding to his attacks, which they will, but it's kind of responding to the way he manipulates or pushes the story every day and takes a story like what's going on right now in the border and just allows it to consume the news for days. The best politician on the Democratic side is going to have to react. They're going to have to kind of figure out how to deal with that on a daily basis. It's going to be a tricky campaign, and it will not be easy.
A very high degree of difficulty because they're going to have to respond to some of the Trump things because the progressive base is going to want them to punch back. I get that. But, boy, when you frame it that way, it really is going to be complex because you've got to do the policy. You still have to do the personality. You've got to deal with Trump. You have to show America you can stand up to this bully. And you get a few good zingers and then you hurt Trump. Who knows how he reacts? He can really freak out. I mean, especially if they're comedic lines, he hates being laughed at. Right. He really hates being laughed at. And it was a point of, I think, why he hated the White House Correspondents Association, why he hates SNL and late night comics. Being cut from this authoritarian cloth, he understands, just like when I've been in the Middle East and leaders there say, the rules are you can't make fun of the leader in the country you're in the Middle East. Because they want to be seen as strongmen. Yeah. Not as laughingstocks. That takes away their power. They'd rather be feared than laughed at in a humanitarian way. I think it'll be interesting. All right, let's take a quick break. Come back, and I want to talk about, I wrote an article for CNN yesterday. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has become Fox News' new villain. And I was writing how Fox News has Ocasio-Cortez derangement syndrome. Like they are just overwhelmed by her right now. So I want to talk about that, about why this choice, the why behind it. So let's take a break, come back with more of our friend Julian Zelizer right after this. Progressive values are the best of American values, and we need to keep fighting for them to save our country.
Don't go anywhere. This is the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. new perspectives, important voices, influential ideas. This is the Dean Obadala Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here, talking to our friend Julian Zelizer. So, Julian, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has become the belle of Fox News. They love to talk about her. I wrote an article for CNN so many times over just the last week. I mean, for even Thanksgiving Day, they talked about her. They had a panel on Friday talking about her shoes going into a museum. They talked about how much money's in her bank account. They've talked about what kind of place she can live in. Everything. They seem obsessed with her. And my question is, do you think they're viewing her as the heir apparent to their villain? Because Nancy Pelosi is not effective anymore. It didn't work in the midterm. It didn't get their people out enough to vote, at least objectively speaking, I don't think. Hillary Clinton is a go-to person, but at some point, they're going to have to move on. Do you think they found someone new in their own calculations? Because they're a business. They would not be talking about her nonstop if people were tuning out. So they're not. They're tuning in. They want to listen and hear about her. What do you think's up here?
Yeah, I mean, the Fox Entertainment Network. I think they like to have foils. They like to have villains to highlight, and whether it's the caravan or a candidate, they're looking for that character to draw in their viewers. And she's interesting to people that she's unknown. So I think if you really don't like the Democrats, if you're a real partisan, she's so mysterious, you can read all sorts of terrible things into her. She has this democratic socialist term, right. Which is useful for a conservative network to say, look, this is what the Democrats are really about. And at the same time, she is young and exciting. And so that serves even a network that focuses on the other party. There's something interesting there, as opposed to people you've been hearing about for decades. But I think you're absolutely right in that she, at least for now, has become a chief foil and a way to undercut some of the Democratic victory, maybe to say, well, they won, but look what Washington's about to get.
And it's not like I'm in any way suggesting they cannot criticize her all day. They can do whatever they want. But I'm saying it's interesting to me how much they're obsessed with her. Because what I wrote about for CNN, and if you're interested, it's on Facebook.com/DeanOfRadio. Thanks very much. Yep. And on Twitter. But they, in the last week alone, have had countless segments about her to the point where Ed Henry actually said, we talk about her a lot on Fox and Friends on the weekend. And they do talk about her a lot. Now, to me, there's also the potentially more darker place reason why they talk about her, because Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham especially, play on the browning of America and the fear that America is getting more Latino and Hispanic and Muslims and immigrants, all different things. She's not Muslim, folks. I'm just saying all different others in their view. Well, she represents that, a young Latina woman who also touches on democratic socialism, but that lets them talk about socialism in a whole different way. Yep. Do you think that plays a role? Because Ron Brownstein, it's Ron Brownstein? Mm-hmm. Right, tweeted about my article, the idea that, and she's not white, sort of like, what a surprise, right? Yeah,
it could be. I just saw this documentary about Roger Ailes. It's called Divide and Conquer, and a lot of it is about his own fears personally, and how fear and triggering fear and playing a fear was at the heart of the whole network. He always thought of that. That's how he's going to get viewers. That's how he's going to talk about politics. So when you say that, it's not that subtle. Of all the different new people he could focus on, there were others too. Boxes of what people could be scared about in 2018. And that's at the heart of the network. The caravan was the story in October, the fear of invasion. And now he can, or the network can talk about the fear of what's about to invade Washington. So it fits in the history of the network very well.
That's remarkable. I have to see that documentary.
Dividing. I thought it was great.
It's new?
Yeah, just came out recently.
Interesting. That sounds very good.
Or it's coming out in the next week or something. I saw a preview, and that was really the essence of the station.
Look, and to be fair, it's not like there are not boogie people. Like, they're making her into a boogie woman.
Yep.
And the left has our own boogie people that animate us to be really concerned about. It tends to be based on policy. At least I hope it is. In their case, I mean, and I was fighting, not really, I don't fight anymore on Twitter, but I was engaging slightly. Some of the Twitter followers who were going after this article going, she wants socialism. And I'd be like, how can you define socialism for me? And they would just disappear generally. Because it's not that Fox News has defined socialism. They've told them Venezuela, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, And that's what she's going to do to America. And even one, Rachel Campos Duffy, one of the Fox News contributors, saying they can't even afford shoes in Venezuela. This kind of stuff. I'm like, what are you talking about? What does that have to do with socialism? What does that have to do with anything? And socialist Democrat and socialism are different. And socialism is really, at its core, taking over all the modes of means of operation and production of a country, like the factories, the farms, the banks, all of it. Nowhere is anyone advocating that. In fact, she's actually pushing back against Amazon getting corporate socialism coming to New York with all this corporate welfare system. And Tucker Carlson actually agreed with her on that on his show. To his credit, actually said, I have to agree with her on that. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is this might elevate her more than anything else. There is nothing probably within the Democratic Party better than being attacked and being the foil of Fox News. And so it elevates her. It keeps her in the media. It makes her the center of attention. So in some ways, Fox might give her the best platform she could have. And there she's not competing with all these other Democrats. She is the figure. And it's look, Nancy Pelosi, for every problem she has had, in some ways used that image and has maintained her power. She's going to be Speaker of the House, so she figured out how to turn it on its head and capitalize on it. And there might be ways in which she does as well.
It seems now Nancy Pelosi will be the next Speaker because there's no competition. There might not be.
I never doubted it. I think we
Do you think
talked
that's
about
good for
it
the Democrats?
I think she's very effective. Yes, I think the House Democrats need a really skillful, coalition-building, savvy politician to lead them against this administration, and just as important, against McConnell. And so I think picking someone, I think she is pretty effective, to be honest. And so I see a total argument in favor of her being Speaker at this point.
No, I had some listeners call and make a great point about against Trump and also against McConnell. Do you really want a new speaker, or do you want someone who understands the nuance of every House rule who's been there before? And that's probably the best argument for Nancy Pelosi, even for just one term for 2 years.
Right.
At least.
This was the first test. The test was, could she win with this coalition against her? And she did. It looks like she will. So this proves she hasn't lost her stuff, because that's what House politics is about. It's not just about being on TV. It's about being able to round up votes, being able to manipulate rules, and most important, keeping Democrats on the same page. And so at least with test one, she passed.
All right, so let's take a quick break and come back, and we're going to talk about your other article, which is really important. It's the idea of Democrats, you wrote, Democrats must vigorously investigate Trump. And the question for me is, what's the line, though? I mean, where do we become the caricature of the GOP doing Benghazi hearings nonstop? I'm hoping that America see the House Democrats as being very responsible, because then when they say something, it's much more, it resonates more as not being partisan hackery, but like, hey, oh my God, they actually are investigating Donald Trump for this or that. So let's take a break and come back with more of our friend Julian Zelizer right after this break.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. The Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back to the Obadala Show. We're live here Monday, November 26th, talking to our friend Julian Zelizer. So, Julian, you wrote an article about why House Democrats must vigorously investigate Donald Trump for CNN, saying beginning in January, they have to go after him. An unprecedented number of red flags about his abuse of power. I agree. Progressives listening agree. My only concern is how do we prevent going over the line till it becomes like everything just seems partisan joke in a way, the same way the GOP was countless Benghazi hearings, which didn't matter anymore, and most Americans had tuned out to it as well.
The problem with Benghazi, it was a frivolous investigation. It was consciously set up to bring down the administration and Hillary Clinton's poll numbers, as Kevin McCarthy openly admitted in an interview. But there are good investigations. It's the responsibility of Congress to conduct oversight. So whether you're talking about abuse of executive power or an obstruction of justice or conflict of interest or cabinet level corruption, those are legitimate issues. Never was Congress's approval rating higher than in the mid-70s. And that was after the Watergate investigations.
Wow.
And people responded very well to that because Congress was fulfilling its duty. So I don't know what the line is, but I think if the leadership can keep it focused on legitimate investigations and stick to issues that really are coming out of problems with the White House, I think the American public will stand for that. His approval is very low. This midterm did show a lot of people are upset with him, not with his policies even, but with the way he conducts himself. So I think there's no reason not to do a lot of it. I actually think it's a responsibility at this point of Congress, and they can do other things at the same time. That's like just not true that you can't legislate and investigate. Great Congresses have done that throughout American history.
I hope that they do it methodically and in a way that they make their case to the American people about, like, the tax returns has become like a rallying cry, sort of like the birth certificate of Obama, although it has real credibility and it's based in reality. I think that Donald Trump, clips from the campaign where he talked about, I do business with Saudi. They've spent millions and millions of dollars and bought properties from me and bragged about that, and then treats Saudi a certain way. I think it's fair to get his tax returns then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The relationship between his own personal interests, his business, and what he does as president, I think is fair game. I think at this point you should see pretty clear-eyed that that's a problem, or it could be a problem, and no one's looked into this. And that's why the tax returns are really important. We never really knew where his business interests lie, and they weren't small. You know, this is not a person who, I had a mom and pop store on Main Street and now I'm president. This is a person who had a global business with real estate investments with other countries, and now he's president. And then he acts in favorable ways to countries that he was doing business with. If that's not reason enough to open an investigation, I really don't know what is.
Well, Trump freaks out about a lot of things when he feels attacked. I think it'll be interesting when they subpoena, in all likelihood, Ivanka Trump over the emails and how he reacts to that. Yeah. I have no idea how he'll react. But if he really feels threatened about his beloved daughter, nothing is off limits.
And look, House Democrats have to be willing to walk away if there isn't anything there or there's nothing provable. That's important. That's where Republicans didn't stop. And that's where Benghazi really went off the rails. It was clear after a while. And I think House Democrats have to do some soul searching before they start and be ready to move away when that point comes, if it comes.
I think it'll depend on chairs of committees who are responsible. I think Elijah Cummings will, I have no doubt. Adam Schiff, former prosecutor, Jerry Nadler, Maxine Waters, they've all been there before. Right. And I think they understand the stakes. Julian, my friend, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks
Folks,
for having
check
me.
out Julian. He's on CNN all the time. Check him out on Twitter at Julian Zelizer.
You got it.
Or right now you can see him on Facebook.com/Dean of Radio if you wanted to watch it instead. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Be back tomorrow. All new live show right here on the Dean Obadala Show. Have a great night.